my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon. This guy back here, that's Bernard. He's my October co-host. He doesn't say a whole lot. He's always underdressed, but he shows up and I appreciate it. So today we've got a book talk video to share with you, a book talk-a-ween, if you will. And today we are talking about We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is one of my favorite scary book authors, along with Stephen King. Stephen King, of course, is the top of the list for many people who like scary books, but Shirley Jackson is definitely at the top of that list as well. One of my favorite books by her is called The Haunting of Hill House, which we're actually going to touch on next week when I do my top 5 scary book recommendations. But for now, we're talking about We've Always Lived in the Castle. It's a very slim volume. You can get through it in a few hours if you put your mind to it. And it's got probably one of the most jarring opening paragraphs I've ever read. And I'm sure this comes up in a lot of people's reviews because it is such a starter. Let me read it to you. So it says, "My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I'm 18 years old. I live with my sister Constance. I've often thought that with any luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf, because the 2 middle fingers on both my hands are the same length. But I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself and dogs and noise. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita phalloides, the death cup mushroom. Everyone else in my family is dead." So that kicks it off. And everything about this book is eerie. The cover is eerie. The back cover's eerie. That first paragraph is eerie. We're set up and it's all eerie. Now, before we get into what this book is about, I wanted to read a little blurb to you about Shirley Jackson in relation to the writing of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and I found this so interesting. So this is taken from a piece from the New Yorker, and it says, "Shortly after the publication of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, in September 1962, Jackson suffered a nervous breakdown and a prolonged bout of acute agoraphobia that prevented her going outside for half a year. I have written myself into the house," she said. It took her 2 years to recover completely, during which time she was unable to write. Toward the end of this period, when she was beginning to recover, she tried to coax herself back into producing fiction by starting a journal. In it, she looked forward to a future in which she would be free from fear and able finally to leave her husband, to be separate, to be alone, to stand and walk alone. Not to be different and weak and helpless and degraded. This new liberated person, she speculated, would have to find a new subject and a new style for her writing. And then there's a blurb from the journal and it says, "If I'm cured and well and oh glorious alive, then my book should be different. Who wants to write about anxiety from a place of safety? Although I suppose I would never be entirely safe, since I cannot completely reconstruct my mind. But what conflict is there to write about then? I keep thinking vaguely about husbands and wives, perhaps in suburbia, but I do not really think this is my kind of thing. Perhaps a funny book, a happy book. Plots will come flooding when I get the rubbish cleared away from my mind." So I thought that was very, very interesting. The whole New Yorker piece on her is really fantastic. I'm sure if you Googled Shirley Jackson, the New Yorker, you'd find the article. But I think it's interesting to keep in mind when you're reading this book that shortly thereafter she suffered a complete mental breakdown and didn't leave the house for half a year. That's heavy. That's a lot. So here we go. Let's jump into the book. So, like the opening paragraph told you, this is the story of 2 sisters, Mary Catherine and Constance. And also, like the beginning paragraph tells you, the rest of their family is dead, save for an elderly uncle who still lives in this house with them. They live in a house that's very large, was once very grand, and it's kind of been in the family for many, many generations. And you know, at some point their reputation and everything started to kind of dwindle within the village that's nearby. So the book kind of starts off with Mary Catherine going into town to get some groceries and some library books. Her nickname is Mary Cat. That's what her sister calls her. So she's going into town to get groceries and library books, and as she's going in there, she feels very hated, very stared at. She feels like everyone's watching her. Everyone's whispering behind her back as soon as she's out of earshot. And going into town causes great anxiety for her, but not as much as Constance. Constance's anxiety about leaving the house is so big that she doesn't do it. She will go out into the garden because that's what her great love is, tending the garden, but she will not leave the grounds of the house. So Mary Catherine goes in and she gets the groceries and she gets the library books, and she stops for a cup of tea or coffee or something at one of the local shops because she feels like she has to. If she doesn't, then just more rumors will start to swirl, and she doesn't want that. And at first you're like, why? You know, why are these sisters such the talk of the town? And then we find out that it was suspected that Constance was the one who killed her entire family, because the family was poisoned. And the family members that died were the mom, the dad, a brother, and then the uncle's wife, so their aunts. And how they had been poisoned was, for dinner this one evening, they were having blackberries, and in the sugar bowl, that's where the poison was put. And, you know, everyone who sprinkled sugar on top of their blackberries was poisoned. Constance wasn't, because she doesn't take sugar on her berries. Mary Cat wasn't, because she had been sent to her room that night without dinner. She was being punished. And the uncle was, I think the story with him was he'd had a bit, but not enough to kill him. But since that night, he's in a wheelchair. His mind seems a little off, but he didn't die. So Constance was the main suspect right away, because she was at the dinner table but didn't have any of the sugar. So she was arrested and she was tried, but there was never enough. There was never enough to really pin it on her, and eventually she's let go. During that time, Mary Cat was taken to an orphanage to await the trial and see what happened with Constance. So they're kind of just holed up in their house most days of the week, except for the one day that Mary Cat goes into the village. There's one neighbor lady who every so often will come and knock on the door and have tea with them. But other than that, they're really left alone, except for, you know, gossip and whatnot in the town. Sometimes neighborhood kids will run up and knock the door, and there's like a chant that they sing. Let me see if I can find it. But it's this little chant that like neighborhood kids say. They knock on the door, they chant it. It's like, Mary Cat and Constance, won't you come for tea? Mary Cat and Constance, don't you poison me, or something like that. And it's just to antagonize the sisters and to amuse themselves, I guess. You know how kids can be. And yeah, they keep the inside of the house in immaculate condition. It's perfect, it's beautiful, it's tidied. Everything is left exactly as it had been the day that everyone died. Like the parents' room, all the bedrooms, the other rooms, everything's left where it was, you know, except in the kitchen. They use the kitchen, but in other rooms that aren't used as frequently, it's just kept immaculately the way their mother had kept it. And so then we also, of course, Uncle Julian, his thing that he loves to do is obsess over the events that happened that night. He's writing a book, or trying to, and he's trying very clearly to step by step go through the events of the day. leading up to the dinner, what could have caused it, who could have poisoned them, this, and this. And he's obsessed with it, and he wants no one to touch his papers, and he wants to be able to figure it out. Because of course he lost his wife, he lost his brother, he lost many things, just like the girls did. Meanwhile, we also learn that Mary Cat has got a touch of the magical about her. She sort of believes in spells, like protection spells, and she goes around the grounds. She likes to bury things for protection. On one tree she nails a book for protection, and she feels like if she can keep these symbols and spells in place, nobody will bother them. They will be safe and protected. One day when she goes out into the woods, she sees that the book that had been nailed to the tree has fallen to the ground. And she's like, to her, this is immediately a very bad omen. And she starts to worry that a change is coming and it's going to be something very bad. So she heads back into the house, and then shortly after she returns, there's a knock at the door. They answer the door, and there is standing a man whose name is Charles. He claims that he is their cousin, and he has come to visit them, to get to know them more, and to stay with them for a little while. So he comes in, they offer him, like Constance offers him, like tea and a snack. At first he's a little leery, of course, because she's been accused of poisoning an entire family, but eventually he does take the snack, and he kind of starts to try to warm himself up to Constance, the older sister. So Mary Cat, like the first paragraph told us, is 18. Constance is about 28, so there's a big age gap. So Charles is trying to get Constance to warm up to him. Mary Cat is not here for it. She does not like him at all. He gives her really bad feelings. She doesn't want him getting too close to Constance. She wants him to leave. So as time goes by, Charles notices that the girls have a ton of money hidden away in a safe. Like all of their dad's money, all the family's money, and they don't really use much of it because, like I said, the house has been in the family for years, so it's not like they're paying off mortgage. And they just go out once for the bigger necessities. It's not like they're out spending money, and he notices this money, and he starts to think, you know what, maybe I should try to convince Constance to marry me, and then that's my money. But it doesn't come to that. Mary Cat begins to plot and plan and try to find a way to get him out of that house. And what I'm going to do now is, if you don't want spoilers for this book, now's the time to click off. But before you do, let me just say this is a fantastic book. I loved it very much. It had one of my favorite things in fiction, and that's an unreliable narrator. Mary Cat, she can't be trusted. We don't know if she is telling the truth or lying or what is going on. And I like that. I like that this book, it's scary, you know, but it's not scary in the fact that there's, you know, gore or jump scares or as much as a jump scare as a book can give you. There's none of that. It's more atmospheric, and it's a feeling of dread that just blankets itself around you for the entirety of the story. And I would definitely recommend it. I'd recommend anything by Shirley Jackson. We're going to be talking more about her next week, like I said, in my top 5 scary book recommendations video. But yeah, you really can't go wrong. So if you don't want the spoilers, now's the time to go. For the rest of us, let's get back into it. So one night when Mary Cat has pretty much reached her limit, she goes upstairs to the room where Charles is staying, and she wants to give him a scare, so she pushes his pipe into a garbage bin that's full of like paper, like dry garbage, and a fire starts. She kind of thought that it would just, you know, be in the garbage can and it would freak him out and he'd leave, but it spreads. It spreads quickly to the whole house, and you know, the girls rush out, neighbors start coming, the fire trucks get called, and while all this is happening, sort of Mary Cat and Constance are still sort of lurking in the shadows because they're very scared of this their neighbors, especially Constance. She's very scared because they hate her because they think she killed her entire family. So while this is all happening, Charles, the cousin who's come, he is freaking out and he's yelling at the firemen, don't forget the safe, because of course the only thing he cares about is that money. So he keeps yelling like, don't forget the safe, don't forget the safe. Eventually, like, the police aren't concerned with the safe. The police are concerned with the people inside and getting them out, and then getting the neighbors away from the house in case it explodes or spreads or whatever. So eventually Charles leaves and we don't see him again for quite some time. And then what happens is, during the fire, Uncle Julian gets killed from smoke inhalation. And before he had, though, a day or two before, he had said something very interesting. And I can't remember if he had been talking to Constance or to Charles. I don't think it was Charles. I think it was either Constance or even Mary Cat herself. And he says something to the effect of, so say it's Constance he's talking to, and she talks about Mary Cat in the present tense. And he says, no, Mary Cat died in the orphanage when her sister was on trial for the crimes. And Mary Cat hears this, or else he was saying it to her. She said, no, I didn't. I'm right here. So that just made my blood run cold, that line. So he dies in the fire. The two girls refuse to go to the funeral because they don't want to leave the house. So, you know, they just kind of honor him on their own at home. And then it shows us the passage of time, and the girls go back into the house and they just kind of try to tidy it up as best they can, even though a lot of it's been burned, especially upstairs. The attic where all their parents' things were kept burned. There's no roof on the house hardly anymore, so they stay out of the top levels of the house and they stay downstairs. They clean it up as best they can, and then they just sort of stay in there. One of the things that had happened when the fire was blazing was, as neighbors were standing outside, they were throwing things at the house. They were running in, grabbing pieces of furniture, breaking it, breaking windows. And so the girls are kind of trying to put it all back together. And then one night there's a knock on the door, and the woman who used to go for tea every so often, it's her husband. And he says, you know, my wife's been here a few times, but you're not answering the door. You know, nobody knows if you're dead or alive, if you're in there or not. But my wife sent me with a chicken and a pie, so I'm just going to leave it on the front steps. So they wait until night has fallen, and then they take it and they eat it. And then a few days later, there's another knock on the door, and this one is a man, and he's saying, I was one of the people that broke your dining room chairs when the fire was happening, and I don't know why I did that. And that wasn't okay, and I'm leaving a pot roast out and some cookies, you know. And then that's kind of how they survive, because forever these people carry this guilt with them for the way they treated these girls, and so they kind of just keep putting food out for them every few days. And the reveal of who and what actually happened to the family is that it was actually Mary Cat, not Constance, who poisoned the family. She had been sent to bed being punished, and she poisoned the sugar, knowing full well that Constance never takes sugar on her fruit. So she knew her sister would be fine, but she knew the rest of them wouldn't. And that made my blood run cold. It's just like, oof. You never know, right? So then the end of the book just kind of shows more time passing. Now these girls are kind of becoming folklore around the village. Vines are growing up over the house, and the vines are sort of covering the windows and the roofs, and there's just enough room for the sisters to peek out and see whenever anyone comes to the door. And now kids play in the yard, and you can often hear parents, you know, gossiping in the yard. And no one really knows, like, are they really in there? Did that really happen? Who are they? Like, it all kind of becomes lore and it gets detached from reality more and more as the years pass on, as, you know, as it does. So what I liked about this book is it kind of doesn't really answer any questions. Aside from the one of who actually killed the family, it was Meerkat, not Constance. We get that answer. And I guess honestly, that's really the only answer we really needed. But as for the rest of them, like, are they alive? Are they ghosts? Was Uncle Julian right? Did Meerkat die in the orphanage when she was waiting for her sister to go through the trial, and now it's just her spirit that's in the house and maybe Constance can see it? Who knows? You don't really know, and it's just kind of left open to you, and you just know that the only thing you know for sure is that now and forever these two girls are going to be in this house alone. Whether that's their physical bodies or their spiritual bodies or whatever, they're in there and they're never coming out. And there's just such an eeriness about it, and it's one of those books where the house is kind of one of the characters as well, and I love that. I love haunted house stories. If you've read an excellent haunted house story, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm already sort of starting to make my list for next year's October videos, because I already of course have the books I'm going to be reading this for this October, but let me know of any good haunted house stories. So there you go. That was We Have Always Lived in the Castle. And it's a fun read. It's perfect for this time of year. If you want the kind of book where you'll be pulling the blankets up around your chin and just feeling a little spooked. Though never entirely knowing why. I love that. So there you go. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read this book. If you have, I'd love to hear what you thought about it. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you Monday. Bye. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita Phaloides. 1, 2, 3. I like my sister 1, 2, 3. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita Phaloides. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita Phaloides. 1, 2, 3. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita Phaloides. The Death Cup Mushroom. 1, 2, 3. Ooh. 1, 2, 3.